AITA for telling my stepfather his daughter is never allowed in my apartment again. I am a 29-year-old man living in Denver, and up until around 2 months ago, I would have confidently said that my relationship with my stepfather Mark, who is 52, was stable. We were never close in the traditional father and son way, but we functioned with a kind of polite mutual respect. He married my mother when I was 15 after my father passed away suddenly from a heart attack, and ever since then I tried to be the low-maintenance kid who made life easier, not harder. I worked through high school, paid for my own textbooks and lunches, took care of my mother when she had surgery, and even while attending college full-time, I worked part-time to help her cover bills. I was the responsible one, the silent glue that held things together, while Mark's daughter Tiffany, who is 22, was treated as the fragile porcelain doll who could not be bothered to lift her own spoon without someone else holding the bowl. When I bought my own place at 27, a modest but modern one-bedroom condo on Denver's south side that cost me a $312,000 mortgage with an $1,850 monthly payment, I paid the full down payment myself. Years of saving, budgeting, and working 60-hour weeks in information technology finally paid off. My mother was genuinely proud. She cried when she first came to see it. Mark, however, acted like I had miraculously unlocked a timeshare we were all supposed to enjoy. He walked in smiling and said that this was a big step for our family, and the way he said it made my skin crawl because he said it as if he had personally carried bricks to build the place. He did not contribute a single cent. Not 1 cent. Yet he behaved like my accomplishment belonged to the household group chat. Tiffany has always been the center of Mark's universe. If Mark and my mother won the lottery, I am convinced that he would hand Tiffany the winning ticket first, then ask me if I could take a picture of them holding it. Tiffany has never held a job longer than 3 months. She leaves destruction behind like a tornado with lip gloss. When her car broke down, it turned out to be completely out of gas. When her rent was suddenly overdue, she admitted she had spent the money on a weekend trip to Las Vegas because she needed to recharge emotionally. When she fights with people, it is always because the entire world has wronged her. When she succeeds at something, it is because she deserves the world. Meanwhile, I was the one who actually stepped up when my father died. I was the one who helped my mother with her medications, who paid past due bills, who worked weekends to cover groceries. Tiffany sent prayers by text, literally. Thoughts and prayers, with a sparkle emoji. That was her version of emotional labor. Still, I tolerated her. She was annoying, but she lived her life mostly separate from mine. Until the key situation began. My building switched to electronic fobs after a couple of break-ins. I had one for myself, one for my girlfriend at the time, and I kept a spare inside a tiny locked box in the back of my bedroom closet. The box was only accessible with a personal code. Only my mother knew about it, because if I traveled for work she would stop by to water plants or check on things. It never occurred to me that this information would be passed around like we were discussing where the holiday tablecloths were stored. Apparently my mother casually mentioned the key box to Mark while talking about how helpful it was to have backup access in case of emergencies. Mark, armed with that knowledge and an incredible sense of entitlement, decided that he was now also entitled to this emergency setup. While I was at work, he let himself into my apartment. He found the key box. He opened it. And he took the spare fob. I only discovered this when my phone buzzed and I saw the message, "Got the extra key, buddy." I stared at that message at my desk in total disbelief. The audacity was unreal. I remember thinking that somewhere along the line, this man had rewritten the rules so thoroughly that my property was now communal property simply because he married my mother. 2 weeks later, the situation escalated into chaos. Tiffany had a huge argument with her roommate because she would not stop hogging the ring light. Yes, that was the actual reason. Instead of handling an adult conversation, she cried to Mark about how she could not stay in that apartment anymore. And Mark, brilliant problem solver that he is, decided the perfect solution was to put her in my home without asking me. He told her that she could stay with her brother. The fact that he referred to me as her brother made my eye twitch. We are not siblings. We never lived together. We never had a relationship beyond awkward holiday dinners. Yet in Mark's mind, I was now the older brother whose home was conveniently available for the princess who could not share a ring light. When I got home that night, I immediately sensed something was wrong. The shoes I leave by the door were slightly moved. The blinds were fully open even though I keep them closed to maintain privacy. And the refrigerator looked like a pack of starving wolves had raided it. I meal prep every week. Around $120 worth of carefully portioned meals. Gone. Containers thrown in the trash. Not a single thing left except mustard and some spring onions that were already dying before I left. I stood in the kitchen with the fridge open thinking, this cannot be real. I confronted Mark the next morning. I did not even bother calling Tiffany. I asked Mark why he gave my key to his daughter. He immediately switched into his favorite script about family unity, insisting that I needed to accept that we were one family and family shares resources. I told him I understood the sentiment, but my apartment did not belong to the family, and he countered by saying that he took responsibility for me when he married my mother, so I should do the same for Tiffany. I reminded him that he once told my mother that Tiffany needed to learn independence. Without hesitation he responded, well, not this. This is different. It was infuriating. A week later everything completely detonated. I was on a business trip in Austin. I returned home Sunday evening with my suitcase, exhausted and ready to collapse. I opened my front door, took one step inside, and froze. I genuinely thought I had walked into someone else's unit by mistake. My living room was covered with clothes, makeup bags, shoes, half-empty coffee cups, and a mountain of cheap jewelry. My gaming computer had been unplugged and shoved against the wall because Tiffany apparently needed good lighting for her TikToks. My bed had been stripped of my sheets and replaced with bright pink ones that had a childish slogan across them that said, "Girls rule, boys drool." The absurdity was so extreme that I actually laughed for a second, because it felt like a prank show. Then I walked further inside and saw the worst part. She had painted my wall. My gray accent wall, the one I spent a whole weekend choosing paint for. A giant, uneven, streaky lavender patch of chaos covered almost the entire center of it. No primer. No tape. No drop cloth. Paint splatters dripped down onto the baseboards and the floor. When I demanded to know why she touched my walls, she said that the room felt depressing and she wanted to feel at home. Not, "Thank you for letting me stay here." Not, "Sorry for touching your things." Just some nonsense about aesthetics. I called Mark so fast I nearly cracked my phone. I told him to get over to my apartment immediately. When he arrived and saw the wall, his face actually shifted. For once he looked embarrassed. That shock alone told me everything about how far past the line Tiffany had gone. I asked him why his daughter had moved in without permission. Tiffany interrupted that he said it was fine. Mark tried to defend himself weakly, but the more he looked at the destruction, the quieter he became. I told him with as much composure as I could manage that Tiffany was banned from my apartment permanently. I also told him he was absolutely not allowed to have a key anymore. When I informed him how much the repainting would cost, he looked like he had bitten into a lemon. $480 for labor and around $60 for materials. He tried to blame my mother by muttering something about her raising me selfish, but even he did not look convinced by his own words. I changed the locks and updated the electronic fob system the very next morning. What happened after that led directly to the chaos I am still dealing with. And then the family war began. The fallout from the Tiffany disaster was absolute chaos, but what surprised me most was who actually lost it first. My mom was livid, but not at me. She cornered Mark at home later that evening and went off in a way I had never seen. She demanded to know why he thought it was acceptable to ignore boundaries, why he could walk into someone else's property like it was a hotel room, and why he kept trying to twist the word family into some kind of weaponized justification for theft and entitlement. She said, "You don't get to weaponize the word family to justify theft," and I swear her voice shook the walls. Mark just stood there, looking like a man who had stepped in something gross and could not figure out how to clean it off. Tiffany, on the other hand, immediately started crying and whining about how she felt disowned. Disowned. This is the girl who had lived off my family's goodwill, raided my fridge, painted my walls, and treated my apartment like a free hotel. I had never owned her to begin with, so the idea that she had been disowned was absurd to the point that I laughed the first time I heard it. Mark, of course, thought I owed him an apology. He demanded it like it was the most obvious thing in the world, like he had been gravely wronged by my decision to enforce basic property rights. I laughed out loud. This man actually expected me to apologize for protecting my own home. He tried to soften the situation by reminding me about that one time he had paid the internet bill as a surprise gift. I paused, blinked, and then did the math in my head, $53. The wall repair alone cost me more than 10 times that. I told him bluntly that if we were keeping score, he actually owed me money, not the other way around. He looked incredulous and muttered that he was not paying for my luxury paint colors. Luxury. It was Home Depot gray, not some designer nightmare that Tiffany claimed to have improved. I almost laughed again, but I kept it under control. My mom, who was still standing behind me, gave him the look that could cut steel, and finally he shut up. Tiffany, however, took the drama online. She went on Facebook posting all these over-the-top, dramatic quotes like, "Sometimes the people who call you family are the first to betray you," and "Home is where betrayal lives," tagging me in every single one. Every time I scrolled past her posts I could feel my blood pressure rising. I resisted the urge to comment, "This is my apartment. You are not family in this sense. Bye." I left it alone, partially because I was exhausted, partially because I knew any engagement would escalate things even further. I knew she wanted attention, and I refused to give it to her. Mark, meanwhile, was living in what could only be described as a defeated state. He could not face Tiffany without being reminded of the paint, the empty fridge, the moved furniture, and the general chaos that had become his own fault. He spent a week sleeping in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, scrolling through his phone like he had just realized he was a supporting actor in the disaster movie of Tiffany's life. He would occasionally peek out at me as if hoping I would forgive him, but I just ignored him. The sheer humiliation of seeing him reduced to a temporary couch-bound exile was oddly satisfying. Every time Tiffany demanded that I apologize to him, I just laughed internally, thinking about how he had tried to teach me lessons on generosity while trampling all over my space. Mark slept in the guest room for a week. Tiffany, true to form, was not done with her schemes. She decided to try to get me back in the most ridiculous, self-important way imaginable. She filed a formal complaint with my building management, claiming that I had illegally evicted her without due notice, insisting that I had no right to remove her from what she claimed was her home. I could not believe the audacity. I did not even speak to her for a week after the painting incident, let alone give her permission to live there. A week after the complaint, management called me in. I went with a folder full of evidence, prepared for the absurdity I was about to face. First, I laid out the deed to my apartment, showing my name as the sole owner. Then I presented the security camera footage of Tiffany entering my apartment with the copied key that Mark had irresponsibly given her. Every step, every move, every time she walked around my kitchen and living room, was captured on video. I also had screenshots of messages where she had explicitly admitted she moved in, because Dad said so. The building manager stared at her as she attempted to explain herself, blinking like she was trying to process a reality that made no sense, as if she had wandered into an alien world where normal rules applied. The manager finally shook their head and informed her that she had violated building policy by entering a private unit without authorization. Not only did she face consequences for the complaint, but she ended up with a building-wide ban for any further unauthorized entry. I could barely contain my grin while listening to the manager calmly outline what she had done. Tiffany's expression went from indignation to disbelief to sheer horror in the span of 5 minutes. Mark, naturally, was furious and tried to argue with the property manager. He insisted that I was being unreasonable, that Tiffany was just a young girl who made a mistake, and that I was somehow overreacting. The manager looked at him and said, "Your daughter is lucky the police weren't involved." That line landed like a ton of bricks. Mark's face fell. He had suddenly become very aware of how serious the situation was and how badly his parenting and sense of entitlement had failed him in front of a neutral authority. After the meeting, Mark tried to turn it on me again, claiming I had humiliated his child in front of the building staff. I told him that Tiffany had humiliated herself by committing burglary, entering someone else's home without permission, and that the consequences she faced were entirely her own doing. He did not like that phrasing at all. I liked it a lot. After the Tiffany fiasco and the building drama, things escalated in ways I never expected. My mom filed for separation. Not just because of Tiffany moving in or the painting incident, but because this whole situation peeled back layers she had been trying to ignore for years. She discovered that Mark had been opening her mail, rifling through her medication bottles, to organize them, and telling extended family completely fabricated stories about how much he had supported me financially. On top of that, he had been using her credit card to pay Tiffany's parking tickets without asking. The sheer audacity was staggering. My mom said, I thought I married a partner, not a second teenager, and I honestly could not argue with her. With the separation papers filed and the legal process underway, my mom moved in with me temporarily. It was crowded, a little hectic, but it was the first time in years that it felt like my home was a safe space again rather than a battleground. Tiffany tried to show up under the guise of wanting to talk woman to woman, which she framed as some kind of emotional intervention, but the building-wide ban I had secured kept her away. I overheard her yelling at the concierge from the lobby that she just wanted to have a conversation, and I could not stop myself from laughing. That level of self-importance crashing against rules that actually mattered was delicious. Mark, ever the drama king, sent me a final message in a desperate attempt to shift blame, saying, "You broke this family." I replied, "You gave the key away," and left it at that. There was a certain poetry in the exchange. Doors only stay closed when people respect them, and that sentence seemed to sum up everything perfectly. Over the following weeks, Mom slowly started to recover her sense of autonomy. She even joked one morning that she wanted to repaint the lavender wall to clean out the stupid, referencing the disaster Tiffany had caused, and we laughed for the first time in months. That shared laughter reminded me how important it is to have boundaries and to protect the spaces that belong to you. Tiffany, predictably, blocked both of us on every social platform she could think of, and for the first time in years, there was peace. No frantic texts, no guilt trips, no chaos creeping into my home. Mark, on the other hand, was learning, slowly, painfully, that family does not mean free access to someone else's life, possessions, or personal space. My apartment is mine again, truly mine, and those locks and fobs are staying changed forever. I have a renewed sense of control and serenity. I spend my evenings in peace, cooking, gaming, and just existing in my own space without the fear of someone barging in, moving my furniture, or repainting my walls. It took a complete collapse of boundaries for everyone to understand that respect and accountability are non-negotiable, but the lesson was finally learned. Thank you for watching this story.